she's on Facebook, so I like tagged her. And
does your mom like actually know what you do? Like my mom, she just like she says computers.
You know, it's like that. The cartoon where it's like what my friends think, what my mom thinks. The mom part I think is definitely true. She's like he draws pictures. Anyway, so we'll see if that works. I have no idea. I'm just gonna like turn it low so I don't have to be distracted by it. Welcome. So I guess y'all are here because you have a passion for Agile or you're interested in Agile. So I'm Alex, and my close friends call me Boase. I'm 1 year Agile next month. Hello, welcome. The things that I'm passionate about enough to study are design. I started off as a designer at TCU, and now I manage designers and all kinds of creatives at an ad agency here in Austin. I studied product management, as Dan mentioned. I took his class, and then I took a couple of subsequent classes too. I study efficiency. I'm like a student of business and management, and hence the new Agile stuff. And then I was a ski instructor at General Assembly at Beaver Creek, and I really am passionate about skiing. So I'm going to kind of go over our objectives in the agenda for the night. This is kind of a lot, but I promise you they're all related and it's not so crazy. And we'll get through it within an hour, I promise. So like I mentioned kind of before we got started, I'm going to try and make Agile way more approachable. Like I said, it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the stuff that's out there. And so I'm here to show you guys exactly the things that we did, the things that didn't work that we tried, and how we changed it to make it work for us. Which is objective item number 2. We're going to learn the specific what's and hows of those things. It's not a lot of people in the classes and all of the Agile talks that I went to and trying to learn this stuff. They talked about the lessons that they learned, and it was very sort of 30,000-foot view, and it wasn't like about specific tactics. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish with this presentation. A big part about Agile, especially if you work in kind of an older environment, you'll get a lot of pushback on Agile, and I certainly did. And so I'm going to equip you guys with sort of like ways to fight back people who are fighting back against Agile. Again, as the subtitle suggests, easing people into it is definitely the way to go. Keeping it short and simple and taking baby steps definitely works over trying to slap everything on the table at once and say, here we go, we're doing this now. Really the way to accomplish those baby steps is by establishing rules early on. That's a big mistake that I made, and we'll get into specifics of that in a bit. So here's the overall agenda that I mentioned a second ago. I'm going to talk about our company status quo pre-Agile and what it was like before anybody cared about what we did, including us, including my team. I have 6 specific tools that I'm going to talk about. They're all really closely related, but I try to break them up and so they're kind of like as siloed as possible so we can talk about them in a slide deck format. We'll go over a basic overview of each tool, common objections for each one of those tools, and then talk about how we kind of pivoted each tool and morphed it into our process, which I think is, like I said, making Agile adaptable is so crucial. And at the end, we'll go over all the typical end of the deck stuff. So, how many people here are in an Agile transition right now? Cool. Okay, great. Product market fit on point 1. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most expert, what's your scale? What's your expertise in Agile? Okay, cool, awesome. All right, good deal. And then who works in software in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4, a lot. Oh, all right, cool. Good to know. I'll apply that as we go forth. Hello, welcome. Grab a beer, grab a seat. And if the music's bothering one, let me know. I like always have music on during my meetings and stuff at work, so it's just kind of like my thing. Before we talk about Agile, I kind of need to explain, like I said, where we were when we got started and what my office is. So I know a lot of you guys are in software. I'm not. Some of the projects that we do are in software. We definitely apply software in Agile in those environments. But our shop is not a dev shop. We are a creative production studio. We build TV ads and Facebook ads and all kinds of PDFs and sales enablement software and all kinds of other things and lots of different projects at once. Not one single project. There are no engineers on our team directly. We're a team of a bunch of producers, and we manage a bunch of all kinds of creatives: designers, copywriters, photographers, developers too, and they're all freelancers. We use a highly vetted pool of freelancers at our job instead of on-site people, which allows us to scale quickly and yeah. So we're not shipping code, we're selling hours. We don't really work on a retainer basis. We bid on specific individual projects. So knowing all that, we'll get into what we're doing. So if I'm not in software, why am I talking to people about software agile development? Why are you guys listening to someone who potentially doesn't know what he's talking about? And really it's because Agile is a prescription for high-performing teams. And that's why I love Agile so much. It's literally a playbook. It's like the Bill Parcells, right? Won the Super Bowl. It's like Bill Parcells gave you his winning football playbook, and you're like the other team, and all you got to do is just like take plays out of there and try them out, and if they don't work, you try something else out. And that's what I really like. There's no like 10 commandments to Agile, and there's no Agile God. Agile gods don't say like this is how you do it. You just kind of, there's so much out there. You just kind of pluck what you guys want, and it makes it pretty easy to do. So I mentioned before about our team previously and how Agile is a prescription for high-performing teams. Essentially, we were a low-performing team, and not necessarily like we were terrible at our jobs, because we weren't. Our company's been in business for 25 years and it's been fine. But there are still a lot of problems with teams that aren't performing at their peak. I'll quickly run through these because these are the most applicable to us. We didn't have expectations. We didn't know how much we billed. We didn't know what % billable we were. We didn't know our revenue. We didn't know anything. Partially because the owner of our company wants to keep that so close to himself, but also the members of our team just didn't care. It was one of those environments where you just is like, sit down, do your job. We're not where we're at, so do more, and that's kind of it. Black Ops projects where the executive or owner taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, really want you to take care of this thing," and automatically it moves to the top of your priority list, and all the clients kind of get pushed to the side. That's a problem. Owner distrusts tech. We don't. Our owner doesn't want to use project management software, regardless of if it's Agile or not, because he doesn't want to have to pay those people for the data if they go under. Or we don't use Google products, we don't use Google Fiber, all that stuff, because our owner's kind of old school and wants to make his tools himself. So that was a big barrier we hit. Secondary and tertiary responsibilities. I'm sure some of your teams are responsible for marketing yourselves, or event planning, or all this other stuff that isn't tracked, isn't billable, and therefore doesn't get the attention that it deserves in a typical or in a small shop environment. Unhappy employees. Morale is low if you're told all the time, just do better, and that's it. If you don't have like a goal to hit or a finish line, there's no like feeling of accomplishment ever. Micromanagement is pretty self-explanatory. Poor work-life balance kind of relates to the whole like all this other stuff that we are forced to do, or not forced, but required to do, that we don't get the numbers at the end, the billing. There's no like a feeling of accomplishment, like I mentioned earlier. And then the cardinal sin, embracing mediocrity. This is definitely the worst part about a non-agile, low-performing environment where you're kind of kept in the dark. And it's kind of like people will get in this mindset of clocking in and clocking out and wanting to get paid more, and just kind of like shrugging at, what else can you do to help? I really think that an employee who asks, what can I do to help, isn't even getting there. It's figuring out what you need to do to help. And so when you get in this mindset, in this environment, it just crushes morale and just defeats your whole reason for being. Oh, I hate that so much. All right, so these are Agile principles. There's 12 of them. We're not going to go over any of these, but I can tell you that overall, looking at these, they're just good practices. I'll send you guys the deck so you've got them. But looking through them, these don't really apply to us because they're so specifically about software. But after like really sitting with them for a while and like looking at them, if you just change what some of them are from business owners and developers to stakeholders and project managers, or successful projects instead of working software, it still applies. It applies to any business. So that's kind of one of the main points I'm getting at, is that Agile really works for everyone. Hey.
I just want to emphasize that point because we have a thing in my company called Agile Everywhere. If you're in sales, marketing, recruiting, anything, every team runs an Agile, and a lot of the principles of breaking work down, making work visible, really can work across all sorts of different work.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the main sort of lessons that I'll get to later. So now that we've done all the kind of like homework, back-end stuff, we'll get to the fun stuff, the status quo, where we are now. So like I said, we got like 6 tools, I call them weapons of choice, that I'm going to go over. There's a lot more than here, but these are just the 6 that worked for me and my team. First, Kanban. I guess you guys have probably heard of Scrum if you're familiar with Agile, at least a little bit, and Kanban's I think kind of catching on a little bit more these days. A traditional Kanban board, there we go, is basically just a column list. Backlog of to-do items, what you're doing now, and done. It has a lot to do with software development, user acceptance testing, and delivery, deployment, and UAT, and internal testing, and bugs, and all this stuff. It's very software oriented. You'll see Jira and Trello. And a lot of software people will tell you that Kanban is Agile, but is that really the case? I'm not quite sure that's true, and I'm gonna prove it to you. So consider the origin, right? Kanban is not actually spelled Kanban, it's actually spelled Kanban, which means card signal, according to Google Translate. And it was invented by Toyota in the 90s, and they started studying this stuff back in the 40s. It's just-in-time manufacturing. So a card is created at the point of consumption. When something flies off the shelf, a card validating the demand, validating that empty space, is taken to the manufacturing plant, and that card travels with the product through development all the way until it's done, and then they fill that spot on the shelf with the new product that's developed. So Toyota published this stuff in 1993, but Agile really came about in 2001. So the point here is that even though Kanban has such this aura of software development around it, they really adopted it. They didn't create it. And that's the main point that I want to drive home, is that all of this stuff, all this Agile stuff, even though it sounds so software, and a lot of the stuff you'll read out there is very software oriented, it's really just process oriented, and processes that could go across any business. So adopting and adapting Agile really is, or Kanban specifically, is a lot easier than it might sound. So again, that's the point, that software companies like Trello, or software enablement, I guess I would say, companies like Trello and Jira look very similar to a sales funnel. You have something that flows through each individual part until it gets to the end. You just got to turn it sideways, and then you got a Kanban board. Same thing with any kind of where there's stages and you go through each one. You turn it sideways, and it's essentially a Kanban board. Same thing with Kubler-Ross's models of grief. After death, you go through these 6 stages, and at the end, it's all good, and then you're fine, and that's when we're happy, at the very end of the whole cycle. So, why would anybody say no to this? It sounds great. Every single side, like sales funnels and going through grief and coming out the other side, is all good things. Why would someone say no? Well, I will tell you. Also, side note, I'm a designer, and it really bugged me that there was a missing spot, so I just added the D, and it just looks so much better. And I think it sounds awesome. It's a great band name, and so it kind of also makes sense. It's like when someone's resisting, they're doing a little dance around, I don't want to change. It's the resistance. I'm comfortable where I am, and I'm embracing mediocrity. So, but change is good. Change is not the enemy. Agile is definitely a mindset, not just a process improvement. And it's the mindset of wanting to continually improve yourself and your team. You might remember this lesson from my friend Rafiki, and it's totally true. If you don't establish the fact that implementing Agile is about implementing a lot of changes, then your team will react with saying, why are we changing everything? And that happened to me, and it was very hard until I finally said, oh yes, this is like a cornerstone of Agile, and then we got it. So, on to the resistance. These are some quotes that people said, and each time we introduce a new tool, we'll go through some quotes that actually were said in my office. This Agile stuff is nothing new. There are different labels for stuff that's been around for years. You will definitely hear this in your office, especially if you're working kind of an older environment. And I kind of agree with this a little bit with the spin. I'll come back to why that is in a second here. We already have project management software. And at the same time, oddly enough, we don't need project management software. So how do you overcome these objections? Well, have faith. Where there's a will, there's a way, and this is the way. So here's our adapted Kanban board. It's obviously, like I said, super low tech. It's just sticky notes and Sharpies. Our columns are a little bit weirder than the three I mentioned a second ago. These are the stages that our projects naturally go through. It was easy for us to figure this out, but we did have to add in columns as we went on. Like I mentioned, we just adapted it. So can't stop, won't stop. It's already in progress. The cat is purgatory, where projects go to die when they get ignored, or hopefully get resurrected. Invoicing is when we have approval from the client, we're ready to send them a bill, and then completed his bill and archived, like it says right there. The colors are the different project managers that are assigned to it, and then I'll talk about our key a little bit later. And then anything that is not billable, like I mentioned, the tap on the shoulder, Black Ops projects, are labeled red, and green is the hot projects. That's like quick turn. On the software part, where we heard people say we don't need project management software. Well, this isn't managing your projects. You're doing nothing that you did. You're doing nothing different than the work that you did before. All of your other processes remain the same. To Dan's point earlier, you're just making it visible, which enables a lot of different conversations and enables a lot of the other tools that we're about to talk about. But that's the point. You don't need to have a piece of software to implement Kanban. And to the other point that you're just, all this Agile stuff is just labeling something that's old, that's been around for a long time. Well, we're not doing anything different than we were doing before. We're just coming together around the existing work and talking about it differently, because it's more visible. More reading on this is Ned Horvath taught the class that I mentioned before, the Agile Austin New Foundations course. It was a great class, and he gave this talk, which actually won Product Camp last year, and this is the URL for his deck there. It's pretty fantastic. It's pretty in-depth too, though. I'll talk more about nerding out on Kanban. I actually also hit up Ned after we had done a lot of our Kanban implementation, and just said, hey man, would you come check out what we're doing? And he was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I went out, bought him lunch, kind of gave him the status quo. He came in and he talked about what we're doing and said, yeah, you guys are doing everything right. What are your next steps? We told him, and he said everything, basically regurgitating everything that Ned said in his talk to me that day. He didn't necessarily tell me anything I didn't know, but that's still good because my entire company and team was there or at least our HQ, was there to listen to what he had to say, and it validated everything that we had been doing. And we had more trust and more strength in our processes that we weren't quite sure of ourselves about. So lesson learned for sure. Get help. Definitely helps with that. On to step number 2, the stand-up. How many of you guys do a stand-up right now? One, a few of you guys. Okay, cool. So yeah, definitely a big practice in software. We did not do it before. This is what a typical stand-up looks like. a lot of people standing up and talking about what they're working on. Short format, supposed to be a quick check-in discussing what they're working on, and typically 3 things happen at stand-up. You talk about what you did, you talk about what you are doing, and you move the cards around and discuss kind of load balancing, which sounds pretty awesome. Why would anybody? Oh, hey, yes.
So did you find any struggles? Because it seems like a very simple concept, but I know a lot of teams that can't even get their stand-up. Like stand-up goes on for like 20, 25 minutes.
I did have those struggles,
okay.
and I have answers to those struggles in the subsequent slides. So yeah, again, so speaking of struggles, let's talk about the resistance struggles. We update each other all the time. It's an open office, and we talk all the time. There are no walls in our office, or if we do, the doors are always open, or there are no doors. And we talk regularly throughout the day. If you hear this, so if someone says this when you're trying to implement a daily check-in meeting, like a stand-up, basically saying we already do this very sloppily. People might not check in about something that they might not. People might have different interpretations of what's relevant or important, or not everyone might be in the room at any given time when they're trying to announce their check-in update or whatever. So that's one nugget. We already have a load balancing meeting once a week, and at the same time, we'll also hear our workload changes drastically from day to day, which is very true at our office. We get quick-turn projects that we turn around in half an hour sometimes and send back. And other projects we'll have, or we're bidding on one right now for 277 hours. Like they range like crazy. And well, I'll come back to that in a minute. Those are the challenges, and then not a said challenge, but definitely what Dan said. People will very frequently tend to go on and on about their stand-up and not keep it short, and then you get an hour-long meeting every week trying to solve the individual problems. How people bought into the changes that we made. This is what our stand-up looks like. Kind of different, obviously, the fact that we're not standing up. The whole reason why you call the stand-up is people are supposed to be standing, and you do it for such a short amount of time because people get bored of standing, or they get achy from standing or whatever. At least that's what you hear. But like I mentioned in the overview, we establish rules to keep it short, which I'll talk about in a minute. So our stand-up follows the 3 sort of things that happen: moving cards, talking about what you did, what you're doing. But we also add load balancing. This is the single most important thing about stand-up, to us anyway, because we can't control the inflow of projects, because our clients' demands vary so greatly and our project sizes vary so greatly. This is crucial to us. We did load balance once a week, and we were trying to have check-ins with our company once a week with a staff meeting, and it just wasn't working. Now we get together by ourselves in the stand-up, and it's completely worth it. Changes. So anything that's coming in, any requests that we hear, any murmurs like, hey, this is coming down the pike, we'll still stick it on the board immediately in the scoping phase just to say, hey, this is on our radar. It doesn't matter if we have any specs on the project at all or any idea what's going on. If anybody's talking about it, it's on the board. And then we also celebrate wins, and we feel like that's important too. Whenever a project goes into invoicing, we're especially big ones, it's kind of like a high five. Yeah, good job, like awesome. We should have a bell actually. That would be anyway. I'm actually gonna write that down. That's a really good idea. Add bell. Cool. We also encourage sit-ins in ours. This is kind of a weird topic on Agile too. Some people call it chickening, I guess because there's some weird cartoon with a chicken and a hen and then a ham, and then it's actually a business fable that's a real thing. I didn't know until just now, but whatever, look it up. Chickening. People have been saying chickening around me, and I have no idea what they're actually talking about until I started talking about it for this project. Anyway, the rules that we established because we are sitting down to keep the thing short is no hows and no whys. And even then, we still get people who start talking a little bit more about, if you hear the word because, you're going to start getting some hows and whys. And it happens at least twice a week. And we have kind of two ways of going about this. First, make sure to tell your team that we're not doing no hows and no whys when you run into this problem. I didn't, and I said Elmo. Elmo stands for enough, let's move on already. And I said Elmo in the middle of someone talking, and they're like, what? And then I told her what it was, and it didn't go over very well. So if you establish that there are no hows and no whys, and then you tell them, Elmo's a way that we can politely communicate this to each other, that will go over way easier. And then an even better way than saying Elmo is saying, why don't we talk about this right after stand-up, if it involves you? Or saying, maybe you guys should talk about this about stand-up, but let's try and keep this short. Super easy, super disarming, keeps it short and simple. Next tool, velocity. Okay, so, bless you. Traditional velocity measurement, it basically means what your team is delivering. Traditional velocity measurement is about story points. So remember the cards that we had on the Kanban board? Each one of those cards gets a value. And the value that it gets increases relative to the complexity of that task or that project or whatever you've got, or whatever your card represents. The more complex, the higher the number. So you'll notice each card has its own point value. This is when you kind of first started out and that was the only thing on our card. The point value is the only other thing on the card besides the title of the project. A lot of software development companies will use the Fibonacci number, so you'll see a lot of 3s and 5s and 8s because they don't quite double to add up to the next number. You can't say these two projects equal this one project. So if you're in software, that will definitely help. If you're selling hours, it won't. I'll get to that in a second. At the end of every sprint, you basically just add up what's in your completed column. At the end of every month, we typically fill this whole thing up and pull all the stickies down, total them up, and that's our velocity for the month. It's pretty simple, right? And then you can add up all of your sprints each month. And I'm saying month when it should be sprint. The time that you make your sprint is totally up to you too. We make ours a month because of all those problems I talked about before where well, actually, I'll get to it in a second. We started a project on the 31st. The due date's on the 29th of next month. That means we accrued all this time, or switch that. Started on the 1st. It ends on the 1st of the next month. We accrued all this time and it bills in the next month. That's a problem for us. That means all this time we accrued, it didn't bill in that same month. So we're having this happen over and over again, and it makes our sprints kind of vary. I'll talk more about that in the next to-do. But the idea for taking your velocity down is measuring your whole team performance. And then you can compare the months or the sprints and see how you guys are doing. Resistance to taking velocity. We can't make the phone ring. I already talked about how our team can't control demand, and we can't control our clients' deadlines. This also has to do with the positioning of our creative shop. We call ourselves more beer. We call ourselves the red phone. We bill ourselves as the red phone. So if a client our clients are like Dell and PwC and AMD and in these giant conglomerate, or not conglomerates, but giant enterprises that have their own advertising, branding, and marketing departments. So they don't need our help until they do, and they call the red phone. We're like, holy shit, I need something tomorrow. Can you do this for us? So another problem for that fluctuation and that crazy demand is definitely a real problem that we have. And I'll talk about addressing that in a second. We can't cut each of our projects into bite-sized chunks. A tenet of Kanban or Agile, especially in relation to velocity, is that you break down each project or task that you're working on into the smallest size chunks possible. That way, if each card, traditionally Kanban, if each card represents one unit of work, your velocity at the end of the month will be much more stable, and you'll be therefore much more predictable, and then easier to manage. But our projects you saw on the board, they range all over the place. Like I just mentioned, we have half-hour projects one day and then 277-hour projects the next. And we'll talk about how we deal with that in a minute. We move too fast for that to make sense. As project managers, as opposed to a developer who can sit down in front of a machine and just bang out code on one specific project at one time, we're managing 10 to 12 or maybe even more projects at any given time, and it makes it really difficult. And so how does Agile work with that? If we did break down, going back to the previous slide too, if we did break down our project to try and make them into one unit of work and break them out into all of our specific to-dos, we would have like 36 cards for each individual project, and it just wouldn't make sense. We'd spend more time moving sticky notes than we would actually managing the project. So let's talk about how to overcome those things. Here is our sort of adapted velocity measurement. Because we're selling hours, our estimation for each project, for our time, our project management time, that task is already built into our existing to-dos, our existing processes. So I know that in Agile, and some of you guys working in software will probably hear this, that estimating by hours is like a serious no-no, because it's very easy for a stakeholder or an executive to come over and say, see, I thought it was going to take 6 hours. How come it didn't take 6 hours? Or if it comes in 4, then he's going to think, if it's like 6 and it comes in at 4, he's going to say, okay, well, every time you say 6, I'm just going to assume it's 4. That's why, one of the reasons why you use Fibonacci numbers, it's not exactly relational to a specific amount of time. But since we've already got that process, it doesn't matter to us. We're selling 13 and 6 and 8 hours in this project. So that answers the question for why we can't and don't need to break our projects down into bite-sized chunks. So here's the key that I mentioned we were going to come back to before. We have our estimated PM hours on the right. We originally had our actual hours on the left, and then we changed the build and put our actual spent hours in the middle. That's not really important, but the thing that is important is that notice that we adapted this over time. We tried the spent hours thing, it didn't work. We tried putting actual on the left, and then we're like, it's not about actual spent time, it's about hours build time, because that's what our company realizes. Even if we go over, we don't get to build a client that. If we come in under, we might be able to build a client for that, but build is what matters to us. So we changed it. And going back to the whole point overall about Agile being adaptable and you being able to adapt to Agile, this is another kind of one of those instances. With low tech, velocity is tactile. When you have sticky notes on the board, you can, look at the shadows. You can tell that this month, this sprint, we killed it compared to that previous sprint. So, look how many more. It's right there. It's in your face. I was actually taking the sticky notes off the board a couple days ago for February, and one of my colleagues in the other room was like, man, we really killed it last month, because you could literally hear how good we did. It was awesome. So that's really one of the benefits of starting with low tech. Number 4, the burn down. So a traditional burn down chart looks like this. You basically have all your to-dos on the right side, and the slope of the line is your velocity, and time is on the bottom. So you start with all this stuff that you've got to do, and you just tick away at it day by day with however many hours you can bill in our case, or how many story points you can take off in a software environment. And then you have the slope of the line that goes from the end of the sprint to the beginning of the sprint and to the end of the to-dos, and then you plot your actuals against that line. You keep it updated so you can see how you guys are doing. If you're above the line, then you're not doing so well, because it's about chipping away. If you chipped away a lot and you're under the line in the burn down chart, then you're doing good. It's a pretty easy way to say, this is our finish line, this is what we're going for. If you're under the line, then you're okay. You can calm down and maybe have better work-life balance. So that sounds pretty awesome. I remember when I first saw this, I was like, holy shit, this is like my to-dos for a whole month. I could do all my work super fast up front and then just chill for the rest of the month if I wanted to. It's like a visual ending line. So why would anybody say no to that? Because the chart needs to go the other way. The chart needs to go up and to the right. And that literally was something that our owner said to me. And he didn't understand why the chart didn't go up and to the right. If you've never seen the burn down chart before, it is confusing. I definitely didn't understand it the first time I saw it, but I didn't take that into consideration when we implemented it in our office. Our numbers are all over the place. Tracking them wouldn't make a difference, which is a true problem in our office. Like I mentioned before, accruing hours for one or several months ahead of time and then billing it 1 month. That 277-hour project is like 6 months or 2 quarters worth of work that we're going to bill on 1 day in 1 month, and we're going to realize all that value at one time. So how could that possibly make sense if you're going to have a crazy month one and then a super low one the next, or at least an average one the next? After tracking the months for a while, we were able to explain why it does make a difference, and I'll get to that in a second. Here's how we fix those problems. adaptive burndown chart is here. So obviously, like I just mentioned, we're above the line here. That means we weren't able to knock off as many billable hours or as many story points in June. Yes, June, and then this is July. I couldn't fit them both with the ending of the other months. But in this month, we crushed it. These are the first 2 months that we started our Kanban, and I was taking off the sticky notes and doing all the math by hand and adding them all up. And every month or every week, I would write down, plot a new point, subtract it from the next, and I couldn't even fit this one on the page. We were off on our goal, at least our expectations, by 80 too little that time and 67 too much this time. So a second ago, I mentioned a big concern being like having months go like crazy this way that one month and crazy this way the other month, which when you're delivering software and you have tiny little story cards, that doesn't matter. That's not even an issue. That's not even brought up. But none of that matters at all because of the law of averages. Look how awesome that is. It is seriously so close, and I have a better picture of the end of the month, but it's like it really should be quality. But we're 12 off this month. So standard deviation is how far away from the norm you are. 12 compared to 80 and 67 is nuts. So here is our first, up until this past December, these are all of our burn down charts. And you can see we did like really shitty one month, really great the next month, and then we're boom, right on point. And they were kind of shitty, and they were really shitty, and then we did really well back on average, and then we were stabilized again, and that's kind of the point of your velocity. You want it to stabilize. The reason why this is all crazy, turnover. Those are months where we had people quit and leave. And the next month, look what happens at every month when someone leaves or brings someone in. Way better on both times. So maybe this month they're like, oh, I'm kind of checking it out, right? Kind of looking for the next game. So the point is when you have turnover, and every team is different. So if you have turnover, or if anything changes with the structure or the process, your velocity will take some sprint, some time to stabilize again. And this is the answer to our numbers are all over the place, and tracking them would make a difference. Well, over time, we now know, I mean, look at our expected numbers. Let me explain this for a second. Each different month, we have an expected number, and this is just an average of what all the previous months build. And it's pretty close to 200 every time. Regardless of all the accrued hours we did in the previous month, or how big a project was here or there, or small or this month or whatever, because it's the law of averages, and because you keep on extending that average out, it will stabilize. It's I think it's really fucking awesome and really easy for all of this craziness for us, for our owner to be like, this is never going to work and our revenue's all over the map. Well, if you just average it out, turns out it's okay.
I love this slide because I've seen this in multiple companies, and I've had the engineers that like, just hang on, we're going to continue to record this. I'm going to do regressions, and within a few months, I'm going to be able to tell you with a very short, small percentage error margin, what our velocity would be. And then when I got to like, okay, we are like 52 to 56 points, and like we just kept hitting it and trying to get better. It really is. It seems kind of magical, but it does work.
It totally does feel magical. And actually, I'm going to talk about standard deviation in a second. So let's address the other problem. The chart needs to go the other way, so we just turned it sideways. And seriously, like, literally just turned it sideways, wrote goal in a big different color, and just made the thing go upward. So now it's a burnout chart. Like, no big deal. But literally, like, I remember when I did this, and I was like, actually, it was way easier to read. Like, I mean, for us, it makes sense because we don't have like such a stable a velocity as a software dev shop would. So because we're all over the map, it kind of does make sense. We're like, this is our goal, we're going to achieve it. And let me phrase that a different way. We don't start with a backlog of items that we need to take out and then take them all out and then we're done. Instead, we hope that the phone rings and we hope that we build up that backlog and then we try to achieve for more billable hours. And it's more of a metrics thing than it is a task. More metrics driven than it is task driven. So yeah. Lesson learned, make the goal really obvious and just make it go up and to the right. All right, 5 and 6, reporting analytics, or sorry, reporting metrics. This is to what Dan's point just was. You really got to go back and look. I wasn't actually doing all of this at first. I wasn't tallying all the things up at the end of the month and trying to calculate our velocity. I did it retroactively after the first 3 months or so because it was so up and down. I was like, forget this. This is not going to work. But if you do go back and you do make it public and you do show your team what your goals are, you can learn from your mistakes and your wins and tell your stakeholders with actual data to back it up that when you have turnover, this shit matters. Like, this really affects your team, which is a huge deal. So traditional metric reporting can be very complex, and you can get very deep in the weeds. You can get really super deep into Excel and learn about queuing theory and cycle time measurements and calculate the throughput, which is also your velocity, and this is the slope, and all this other stuff. And if you're a nerd like me, this is awesome. And you can really like get into it, but not everybody's a nerd. So they will do the resistance if you try to throw all this data at them. So our projects don't start at the beginning and end of every month. I've talked about this a couple times already. So I mean that is a problem. We kind of talked about it in the couple slides ago, but I got ahead of myself. I don't care how much you guys are billing as long as it's a shit ton. That sounds like it's words of encouragement, but it is so depressing if you hear it over and over and over again. More is not a goal at all. This is how we overcame those rejections. Our adapted data reporting, at least adapted from a software sense, is that like what matters to us, percent billable and total billed. Sadly, our owner does not want to show us revenue, even though we have access to that data, and I could tack it on to the additional stuff that I do, but I'll talk and I'll show you guys in a second all the work that went into getting all these calculations, but adding on revenue would have just been an insane more amount of work and math, and I don't math good. So these are our expectations, right? These are what we're striving for. Like I said, we're more metrics and goal driven than we are like task driven. So this is how we know that we're doing a good job. These are our numbers that we're looking at. And where do these numbers come from? They come from all those stickies that I was talking about. At the end of every month, by hand, I would go and pull them all up and write down who they were and color code it and write down the hours estimated, the bill, the spend, and calculate dead projects to see who's like just jerking us around asking us for estimates, all kinds of stuff. It was intense. I mean, look all the tabs at the bottom. So much pain in the bottom of the spreadsheet. But the pain was eventually alleviated. So all of that data allowed me to do this, and this is all that mattered to our company, to our stakeholders. We were able to show the expected hours, and look, like I mentioned, like it's like right around 200 every single month. And then our actual build and the deviation between the two, and like I said, getting a standard velocity helps out with the smoothness of your operation. It helps out with the work-life balance and all that, and being able to set expectations. The percent billable, obviously important. And then the average billable, again, just the law of averages. It's so awesome and it's so simple. Look how similar these numbers are. It's like, we can like take this to up top and say, this is what we can do. Yeah. And the work paid off. I mentioned that my owner doesn't trust tech. He wants to create everything himself. This is our brand new, launched last month, Kanban proprietary software that we developed in-house with my product management skills that I used, and bang, look at that, it's beautiful. It's great, it's a thing of beauty. To be honest, I'd be rather using something like Jira or something with actual project management like tasks so we can invite people in, but we use Basecamp. It does a decent job. This is now, this is this essentially. And we are buying a TV, and we are going to replace this with that screen and not have to move sticky notes anymore, because we all have our accounts and move in on our own computers, and it gets updated in double yeah. It's great. So the thing I want to mention about this and about these numbers, reporting and stuff, notice at the top here, this is where we kept all of our percent billable, all of the numbers of each month and what was expected of us or what we expected of ourselves. And that's really crucial. If you say it in the meeting, that it'll get lost. If you have it front and center in front of people and put it in their faces, and every day we have a stand-up looking at this thing, that's really going to make a difference. It would be even more helpful if we had the total of this up here, but now that we have a digital one, it's going to happen. That's kind of the point. Having these numbers that were sort of previously hidden from us, I don't want to say that so negatively because I understand our owner and how he operates and our managers and how they just don't care because of our company culture. But our team now takes ownership of this number. We care more because we have this thing that we take and we take down all these numbers and put them on the board, and we're diligent about doing it, and this is our work. And I don't have a good way of explaining what that can do to a team, but I'm telling you, it changes you in a good way. Additional reading on metrics. This is Dan's presentation that he gave about choosing what metrics are important to you. OKRs stand for objectives and key results. I thought it was great. It definitely helped me figure out what other objectives that we're going to start implementing now that we're done with this deployment of that software. So I recommend checking it out. It'll be in the notes, in the show notes. All right, last tool. The retro. This is definitely by far the best thing that we did out of all of the Agile practices that we put in. It gave us a space to call our own. We didn't have a single other meeting that was just us, where we got to solve our own problems. And I'll get to talk more about that in a second. But a traditional retrospective meeting comes in a lot of different forms. This picture in the back is liked, learned, lacked, longed for. And you basically get together and you write down all these different ideas that you have in these categories that you then stick up in the right category, and you kind of then group them. And the magic of that is that they no longer become ideas from a single person. It ends up being just ideas on the board. If something has a bigger grouping, like whatever that was up there, everybody you understand everybody starts to feel the same way. So here are some of the different styles. We do this number one a lot. What went well, do differently, what still puzzles us, and what did we learn? I find that tends to put people in the right mindset to pull ideas out of their heads. Start, stop, continue, that's another sort of 3-category option. And then the rest of these you guys obviously can read them. Stakeholder sit-in, again, the chickening thing. I think that this is you'll read a lot of different things about this, whether or not you'd have sit-ins, stakeholder sit-ins, owner sit-ins in the retro or not. I think that's definitely up to you. But ideally, you'll cycle through all of these, and I'll talk about the stakeholder thing in a minute. But let's talk about the resistance for this one. I just can't keep up with all the change. I mentioned earlier how I L-note someone without telling them what was up, and I basically said shut up without establishing the rules first. I didn't explain to my team before I started trying to convince them to do Agile that it's a mindset first and it's about improving what we do. And if I had done that and convinced them that we could be better first, the last 7 months of my life would have been now a lot easier. So again, Agile is not a process, it's a mindset. I just want to be told what to do so I don't have to engage. Holy shit, I told you the cardinal sin of embracing mediocrity. I'm like, we're going to go to the next slide, I don't want to lose it. This will expose us quite a bit. Again, what are you afraid of exposing for So going back to the thing I just mentioned about chickening in the retro. I should probably turn off the stream for this because I'm friends with my coworkers on Facebook. But we have a problem with truth to management. I'm streaming because it's my birthday today, and my mom's watching. Hi, Mom. We have a problem with truth to management in our company, and that is a serious fucking problem. It's no joke. Like, people hide stuff from management so they don't have to deal. If you have that problem, do not let anybody else in your retro besides your team. That needs to be a safe place where honesty is paramount and you actually can talk about everything that needs to be talked about. We have made it such a safe place that we stop talking if anybody else walks in the room and we're like, sorry, we're not, like, you can't join us, like, that's it. And also, this is where we feud. It's become so successful that we talk about our problems with each other in that meeting. It's pretty fucking fantastic there's a great book, I should add this actually, called The Speed of Trust. And it's all about this, and I totally believe it in making a safe place at work. I really hope no one in my office just saw me say that, but anyway. I had something else to say, but it'll come back to me. Truth to management, always. I have so many issues come up, I can't remember all of them to bring up in this meeting. I'll talk about how we address that specifically. But this is really a problem if you have a longer sprint. If it's 2 weeks, that's still a problem. If you have a month, it's a bigger problem. So here's how we overcame this stuff. Does anyone know who this is? Boom! Yeah. So this is Brian Eno. For those of you who don't know who Brian Eno is, he is a musical artist who he does a lot of different genres, but he's known for ambient music. And and he's also a producer of a lot of like really famous kick-ass artists, and they all kind of say that Brian Eno has given them inspiration. And when they say that, you normally hear someone say that, you're like, oh, they listen to his ambient song, like, oh, I want to try this out, the way he did this sound or something, but no. He was in the booth with them, and he gave them the set of 40 cards that he established called oblique strategies. And there are iPhone apps, and you can find them online. It essentially has these cards with them, these weird sayings like, give way to your worst impulse, or ghost echoes, like what? So the idea is to just nudge someone's mindset from where they are traditionally, doing something that they do over and over again, into something else. I mentioned all of those different ways that you can do a retrospective meeting. Hopefully, you cycle through them all. To be able to say something that makes you mad, sad, or glad, instead of saying mad, sad, glad, say like, to learn, or whatever. You know, you're framing something different in someone's mind so they can be more creative and access different parts of their mind. And this is exactly what Brian Eno has done for many years. Our retro looks like this. I mentioned wet well, learn puzzles, and do differently. Any retro you do, I would definitely add a parking lot because these will run long, especially if you have problems that you're trying to fix in your organization, if you have a troubled organization. My first retro meeting I scheduled for an hour, went 2 hours because we tried to get to everything on the list. We just moved to the parking lot and said, if this is important enough next time, we'll bring it out and we can stick it back on the board next sprint. Like I mentioned before, we keep our sprints, our retros private, and there's no judgment, so we can talk about feuds. There's always truth to everyone and total brutal honesty. And I should rephrase that: brutal to ourselves about speaking honesty, not like being. I didn't like this thing you did, and you sucked because of it. Like brutally, like just always speaking 100% the truth the whole time. And like I mentioned, it gives us a chance to solve our own problems without having to run them up the flagpole and get approval or ask for help or anything. We have solved more problems in this meeting than in any other amount of staff meetings we've ever been in. Like I mentioned, the retro is the single biggest piece of Agile that I would recommend. So this is how we solve the I forget stuff problem. We use Basecamp. There's an automatic check-in feature, so we ask every Friday at 2 p.m. Anything come up this week that you want to remember? Slack has a great reminder feature. There's tons of different like auto email reminders. We use this a ton actually for a lot of different things, like any project come up that's portfolio worthy that we want to add. You can add it right in there and type up a little short story and then tag the deliverables. Anyway, automatic check-ins I think are a great little nugget and tool to take away from this. Additional reading on retros. This book is awesome. They recommended it to us in the class, in the Agile Foundations class. By the way, that cost is only $50, and it's like 6 or 9 weeks or something, and you get free dinner. It's like worth it just for the food. I would totally recommend you guys go. So those are my 6 tools. I want to also say, on a personal note, I'm going to turn off the music for this because it's really important. I went to college not knowing what the hell I was going to do, and I majored in ad PR because my friends were doing it, and I got a job in advertising because that's what my major was in. And I floated between jobs. I lived in Fort Worth, I lived in Dallas, I lived in Houston. I followed girls, I followed job opportunities. I didn't have any direction. And a little over a year ago, I sat down for the first time in my life and said, like, what are the 3 things that I care about? And we need to get into that specific part. But I started doing research into what I want to do with the rest of my life. I landed on product management. I really dove in to figure out what makes that work well. And I found Agile. And I mentioned it's a mindset, not a process, about wanting to continually improve. And I wholeheartedly adopted that without even knowing it. I didn't actually even hear that until like a few months ago. And it has honestly changed my life. I am not talking about Agile Kool-Aid like everyone will hear, and you will totally hear it. But I'm telling you, it has made me a better person. It has made me a better friend. I have Kanban'd my personal life. Mitch Kanban'd his wedding. It has seriously changed my life so much better. I would definitely not be here. Obviously, I'm getting to talk on Agile. I wouldn't be here today if I was. But this is our first sprints data, and this is our last sprints data.
Does your boss believe in technology now?
In his own technology. This is a recap. I'll send you guys this stuff. Please give me the feedback, whether you guys do it now or later. I'll send you all the deck. But it's just a little quick Google form, and that's all I got. Thanks for coming. Anybody have any questions? Nailed it. Don't forget a Dos Equis on your way out. Or the birthday beer.
Alright, thank you. That was awesome. I have to say, like, the best presentations are the ones when they're actually, like, totally related back to real life and you're showing actual examples. I hate that high-level, just conceptual bullshit stuff because there's so many things with Agile that work great in principle, but it's a lot harder to actually show and do it in practice. So I thought that was awesome. The last 2 slides were, see, that's metrics, like impactful. I like showing like where you started and where you ended up, and that's pretty impressive. So, all right, we have plenty of beer, hang out, and we usually take some time to network and stuff. I haven't talked to everybody, but I know everybody, so I'm sure I'll be bugging you.
You're taking notes.
So which is really good considering the stretch.
Yes, it's
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, your fonts less words. Like now, I was like, he's already trying to be now, I listen to you. There's multiple important
Wait, where's the bigger fonts, less words?
So like, it's more of a problem at the beginning. But like, you had a lot of little words. The first few slides, like the first 3 or 4 slides, like that one has too many words. People read them and they don't focus on what you're saying.
I can combine those. That's what it's
Yeah, well, also, like, when you're saying this is what we're going to talk about, I don't think people need to read words. I think you can just visually, like, verbally lay it out. Like, how does it help you to listen to have that? Like, it sets the tone for me, but I don't know that I need to, like, have specific. But